The chandeliers inside the Grand Hyatt Seoul Ballroom hung like frozen constellations, each one worth more than most people earned in a decade. 600 guests filled the room. Corporate titans, political fixers, old money families whose surnames appeared on buildings across Gangnam, and a handful of foreign diplomats who had traded their embassies for an evening of Korean power brokerage. Waiters in white gloves carried trays of Dom Perignon through corridors of Italian marble. An orchestra played Debussy near a stage draped in black silk. This was the annual chairman's banquet, the single most exclusive gathering in South Korea, and every person inside that room had been handpicked by Chairman Kang Hyun-woo himself. At the entrance, camera flashes erupted like controlled lightning. Ryu Tae-hwan stepped through the doors. 6'3", black three-piece suit cut so precisely it looked stitched onto his broad frame. Jet black hair slicked back without a strand out of place. Dark charcoal gray eyes that swept the room with the calm patience of a predator who never needed to rush. A luxury mechanical watch caught the chandelier light on his left wrist, and his light-groomed stubble framed a jaw that looked carved from granite. Beside him stood Han Seo-rin, 28, international fashion model. 5'10" in heels that probably cost more than a semester of university tuition. Her dramatic midnight blue designer gown pooled behind her like liquid sapphire, and her long dark hair fell in immaculate waves over bare shoulders. She was the kind of woman magazines built entire issues around. Cameras flashed again. Guests whispered. Everyone assumed she was his wife. But his real wife was not in that room. His Nigerian wife was sitting in their Hanamdong penthouse, still wearing the champagne-colored dress she had carefully chosen 3 weeks ago, still believing her husband was sending a car. Then, 27 minutes into the evening, the banquet doors opened again. She walked inside. She wasn't wearing diamonds. She wasn't wearing a designer gown selected by a stylist. She wasn't trying to compete with anyone. But something about her presence, the quiet, unhurried elegance with which she carried herself, made conversations stall mid-sentence. Heads turned. Then Chairman Kang Hyun-woo, 67 years old, the most powerful businessman in the Republic of Korea, looked up from his champagne. He set the glass down. He stepped away from Tae-hwan mid-sentence, and he walked directly toward her. He smiled warmly, and said, "Madam, I've been waiting to meet you." Tae-hwan froze, because the woman he had been too ashamed to bring, the woman he had replaced with a model, was the very woman the chairman had been searching for. Please like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to comment where you're watching from so I can see just how far across the world this story has reached. 12 hours earlier, the penthouse had smelled like jollof rice and lavender fabric softener. Naya Dappa stood in front of the bedroom mirror, holding a dress against her body with both hands. It was champagne-colored silk, floor-length, with a modest neckline and elegant tailoring that followed her curves without shouting for attention. She had found the fabric at a small textile shop in Itaewon 3 months ago and had spent weeks hand-sketching the design before taking it to a quiet seamstress in Yongsan who specialized in formal gowns. She turned sideways, adjusted the angle. Her long jet-black bone-straight ponytail swung gently against her back. The premium frontal she had installed 2 days ago, styled with soft baby hairs carefully laid along her forehead. Her rich, deep brown skin glowed under the warm vanity lights. She had kept her makeup natural. Soft brown eyeshadow, a hint of highlighter on her high cheekbones, nude lip gloss. She didn't look like a model. She looked like herself. And she had spent 23 years learning that being herself was supposed to be enough. Her phone buzzed on the dresser. A message from Tae-hwan. Meeting running late. Don't wait up. I'll send details about tonight. She read it twice, then set the phone down and looked back at the mirror. He said he'd send a car by 5, she murmured to herself. It was already 4:30. She pressed the dress against her body one more time, smiled softly, and whispered, "Tonight will be different." She had no idea how right she was, and no idea how wrong the reason would be. In a private lounge on the 46th floor of the Ryu Holdings Tower, Tae-hwan sat across from Jae-min, his right-hand man. Jae-min was 36, built like a middleweight boxer who had traded the ring for tailored charcoal suits. His face was calm and unreadable, except for his eyes, which always saw more than he was willing to say out loud. Seo-rin's stylist confirmed the dress, Jae-min said. He scrolled through his phone without looking up. Car picks her up at 6. She'll arrive at the venue 10 minutes before you. Taehwan didn't respond. He adjusted the cufflink on his left sleeve. His fingers, loyal across the right knuckles, honor across the left, moved with practiced precision. Jae-min set the phone down. And Naya? The silence that followed lasted 4 full seconds. She stays home, Taehwan said. Jae-min studied him. She's your wife. I'm aware. She's been preparing for this banquet for 3 weeks. She altered a dress. She rearranged her client meetings. She turned down a project deadline because you told her this night was important. Taehwan stood. He walked to the window. Seoul stretched below him. Steel and glass and ambition stacked 100 stories high. The chairman has invited every major investor in East Asia, Taehwan said quietly. Nakamura from Tokyo. The Chun family from Hong Kong. Minister Yu's people. This isn't a dinner party, Jae-min. This is where the next 5 years of this organization get decided. And Naya can't be part of that? Taehwan turned. His expression wasn't cruel. That was the worst part. It was calculated. She's not from this world, he said. She doesn't speak the language of these rooms. She doesn't understand the politics. If she says the wrong thing to the wrong person, if she wears the wrong thing, if someone looks at her and decides I married beneath my position, you married her because you loved her. Love doesn't close deals. Jae-min exhaled slowly. He had known Taehwan for 14 years. He had watched him dismantle rival operations without raising his voice. He had seen him negotiate with politicians who could have buried him. He had never once seen him make a decision based on fear. Until now. You're not protecting the organization, Jae-min said. You're protecting your pride. Taehwan's jaw tightened. Call Seo-rin's team, he said. Confirm the arrival sequence. Jae-min picked up his phone. But before he dialed, he said one more thing. She's going to find out. Taehwan didn't answer. He already knew. He just believed that when she did, she would understand. He was wrong. Naya waited until 6:15. Then 6:30. By 6:45, she had called Taehwan twice. Both calls went to voicemail. She sat on the edge of the bed in the champagne dress, her hands folded in her lap, her phone resting beside her. The penthouse was enormous. 4,000 square feet of Italian marble, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Han River. Furniture so expensive it felt like sitting inside a museum. And it was completely empty. She had moved to Seoul 18 months ago, 2 weeks after their wedding in Lagos. The ceremony had been beautiful, held in her aunt's compound, filled with aunties in colorful osso-oak, cousins dancing to Whisket, and her Aunt Irene crying so hard she needed 3 handkerchiefs. Taehwan had flown in with a small entourage, wearing a black agbada her aunt had commissioned, and when he had taken her hand during the vows, she had believed, truly believed, that she was marrying a man who saw her. Not her background, not her social class, her. But Seoul had changed things. Slowly, at first, he stopped bringing her to business dinners. He began scheduling meetings during times they had planned to go out together. When his associates visited the penthouse, he introduced her politely but briefly, as though she were a guest in her own home rather than its center. She had tried to talk to him about it. He always said the same thing. It's complicated. You wouldn't understand. And each time the sentence cut a little deeper. Now she sat on the bed and stared at the phone. At 6:52, it buzzed. Not a call. A notification from a Korean celebrity news account she followed casually. She opened it. The photograph filled her screen. Taehwan, black suit, standing at the entrance of the Grand Hyatt Seoul, the banquet she had been preparing for. And beside him, holding his arm, was Han Seo-rin. The caption read, Ryu holding CEO Ryu Taehwan arrives at the chairman's banquet with international supermodel Han Seo-rin. The couple drew significant attention from assembled guests and media. Couple. Naya read the word 3 times. Her hands didn't shake. Her eyes didn't fill with tears, not yet. She simply looked at the photograph with the careful, measured stillness of a woman who had spent her entire life learning how to absorb pain without letting it break her posture. She set the phone down. She looked at the mirror, the champagne dress, the careful hair, the soft makeup, all for a man who had decided she wasn't worth being seen with. "So that's what he thinks I am worth," she said quietly. The words filled the empty penthouse like smoke. For a long time she didn't move. Then her phone rang. The caller ID read, "Mama Iridi." Naya almost didn't answer, but something in her, the part that still remembered sitting on her aunt's veranda in Lagos, eating chin-chin and listening to stories about women who never let the world flatten them, made her pick up. "Naya." Her aunt's voice was warm and direct. "You sound like you're holding your breath." "I'm fine, Auntie." "You're lying. I can hear it from 6,000 miles away." "What happened?" Naya closed her eyes. "He took someone else to the banquet." Silence on the other end. Not the silence of shock. The silence of a woman deciding exactly how much truth to deliver. "Who?" "A model. Korean. Famous." Another pause. "And you are sitting there in that beautiful dress, alone in that big apartment, wondering if you did something wrong." Naya pressed her lips together. "Listen to me," Mama Iridi said. Her voice dropped into the register she used when she was no longer offering suggestions. "A woman's worth does not decrease because someone fails to recognize it. You hear me? Auntie, do you hear me, Naya?" "Yes, Ma." "Good. Now, you have two choices. You can take off that dress, cry into your pillow, and let that man believe he was right to leave you behind. Or you can put on your shoes, walk into that banquet, and show every person in that room exactly who Ryu Taehwan married. He didn't want me there. I didn't ask what he wanted. I asked what you're going to do." The silence stretched between Lagos and Seoul like a thread pulled taut. Then Naya opened her eyes. She looked at the mirror. The champagne dress caught the light. "I'll call you later, Auntie." "That's my girl." The line went dead. Naya stood slowly. She slipped on her heels, nude, understated, elegant. She fastened a thin gold chain around her neck, small gold studs in her ears, a single delicate bracelet. She picked up a small ivory clutch that she had designed herself, hand-stitched, with a subtle geometric pattern inspired by Yoruba textile motifs. She looked at the mirror one final time. She didn't look like she was preparing for war. She looked like she was preparing to remind someone of something they had forgotten. She walked out of the penthouse, alone. The Grand Hyatt ballroom had settled into its rhythm by the time Naya's taxi pulled up to the entrance. Inside, Taehwan was doing exactly what he had planned. He moved between clusters of powerful guests with Seo Rin on his arm, her presence a visual statement that required no translation. She knew how to smile at the right moments, how to laugh softly at jokes she didn't find funny, how to stand close enough to suggest intimacy without creating scandal. She was, in every measurable way, the perfect accessory. And that was exactly the problem. Chairman Kang Hyun-woo watched from the far end of the room. He stood near the bar with a glass of sparkling water. He had stopped drinking alcohol 7 years ago after a health scare, and studied the crowd with the quiet patience of a man who had spent 5 decades learning that the most important things in any room were usually the things most people overlooked. His assistant, a young woman named Park Min-ji, appeared beside him. "Chairman, Mr. Ryu is requesting a private moment with you before the dinner program." "I'm sure he is," the chairman said. He didn't move. "Tell me something, Min-ji." "Sir." "The creative director behind the Jeju Cultural Resort proposal. The one that arrived anonymously through the Seoul Design Council 6 months ago. Have we confirmed the identity?" Min-ji hesitated. "We traced the submission through 3 intermediary firms. The original designs, the cultural programming framework, and the sustainability model were all created by the same person. And her name is Naya Dappa. She's 23, Nigerian. She runs a small creative consultancy from a co-working space in Mapogu." Min-ji paused. "She's also the wife of Ryu Taehwan." The chairman turned his head slowly. "His wife?" "Yes, sir." Something shifted in the old man's expression. Not surprise, recognition. The quiet confirmation of something he had suspected but hadn't been able to prove. Is she here tonight? Minji scanned the room. I don't see her, sir. Mr. Ryu arrived with the model. The chairman took a slow sip of water. Interesting, he said, and the word carried the weight of a verdict. Across the room, Taehwan was mid-conversation with Nakamura Kenji, the Tokyo-based head of one of Japan's oldest investment groups. Nakamura was 61, sharp-eyed, and famously unimpressed by everything. Seo-rin stood beside Taehwan, smiling politely. Your development in Songdo is ambitious, Nakamura said. But ambition without cultural integration is just expensive concrete. He glanced at Seo-rin briefly. Your wife? The question hung in the air. Taehwan didn't hesitate. A close associate. Nakamura's eyebrow rose a fraction of a millimeter, which, for Nakamura, was the equivalent of another man falling off his chair in shock. I see, Nakamura said, and he turned back to his champagne. Jaemin stood 15 feet away, close enough to observe, far enough to remain invisible. He tracked every micro-expression on Taehwan's face. He noticed the way Taehwan's shoulders were slightly more rigid than usual, the way his eyes kept drifting toward the entrance, the way his fingers, loyal, honor, curled and uncurled against his glass. He was waiting for something, or dreading it. At 8:17, the banquet doors opened. Naya stepped inside. She didn't pause for dramatic effect. She didn't scan the room looking for her husband. She simply walked forward, her posture straight, her chin level, her long black ponytail falling in a sleek line down her back. The champagne gown moved with her like water, catching the chandelier light in soft golden ripples that made it seem as though she were glowing from within. She wasn't the tallest woman in the room. She wasn't the most extravagantly dressed. But there was something about the way she carried herself. A quietness that demanded attention precisely because it didn't ask for any, that made conversations falter. A woman near the entrance leaned toward her husband. Who is that? He shook his head. Near the bar, Chairman Kong set down his water glass. He straightened his jacket, and he walked. Taehwan saw her at 8:18. He was mid-sentence, something about quarterly projections, when his voice simply stopped. His dark charcoal gray eyes locked onto the entrance, and for one unguarded moment, every mask he had spent his adult life constructing fell away. She was here. She was wearing the dress she had been altering for 3 weeks. The dress she had shown him on a Tuesday evening while he pretended to look at his phone. His chest tightened. Something cold slid through his stomach. Not anger, not surprise, but the specific, nauseating recognition that he had made a terrible mistake and it was already too late to undo it. Seo-rin noticed the change immediately. She followed his gaze to the entrance and saw the woman in champagne silk. Who is that? Seo-rin asked. Taehwan didn't answer. Jaemin, standing behind them, did. That's his wife. Seo-rin's perfectly composed expression flickered, just once, before resettling into neutrality. She looked at Taehwan, then back at Naya, then back at Taehwan. You didn't mention you were married, she said quietly. It wasn't relevant. It's relevant now. Chairman Kong reached Naya before Taehwan could move. The old man approached with the unhurried confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove. He stopped 2 feet in front of her, smiled warmly, and extended his hand. Madam, he said, I've been waiting to meet you. Naya blinked. She didn't know this man, or rather, she didn't know that he knew her. I'm sorry, she said. Her Korean was careful and clear, accented but grammatically precise. She had been studying for 18 months. Have we met before? We haven't, the chairman said. But I've studied your work. The words landed softly, but every person within earshot heard them. My work, Naya said. The Jeju Cultural Resort Proposal. The Sustainability Framework. The integration of indigenous Korean artistic traditions with contemporary West African design principles. He paused. It was the most innovative proposal my board has reviewed in 15 years, and I've spent 6 months trying to find the person who created it. Naya stared at him. She had submitted that proposal anonymously. She had been afraid. afraid it wouldn't be taken seriously if people knew who she was, afraid that her name, her nationality, her age, her husband's reputation would overshadow the work itself. So she had hidden behind intermediary firms and unsigned documents. And the chairman had found her anyway. How did you? My team is very thorough, he said. He gestured toward the interior of the ballroom. Walk with me. There are several people who are very eager to hear your perspective on cultural design integration. Naya glanced across the room. She saw Tae-hwan. He was standing near the center of the ballroom, Seo-rin beside him, his glass held mid-air, his face completely still. Their eyes met across 60 feet of marble and crystal. She didn't look away first. He did. Naya turned back to the chairman. I'd be honored, she said. She walked into the ballroom on the arm of the most powerful man in South Korea. And every guest in the room watched. The first 30 minutes after Naya's entrance reshaped the social architecture of the entire banquet. Chairman Kong personally introduced her to 4 of the evening's most important guests, Nakamura Kenji, the Chen family patriarch, a senior representative from the Ministry of Culture, and Dr. Lim Soo-yun, the head of Seoul National University's International Design Program. Naya didn't perform. She didn't try to be impressive. She simply answered their questions with the specific, grounded intelligence of a person who had done the work. When Nakamura asked about the sustainability model, she explained her framework calmly, referencing Nigerian communal architecture principles and how they could be adapted for Korean coastal environments. When Mrs. Chun asked about the budget feasibility, Naya pulled a small leather notebook from her clutch. She always carried one, and walked her through the cost projections she had developed. When the ministry representative asked whether she had formal training, Naya said, I studied design at the University of Lagos and completed 2 professional certifications online while working full-time. I also spent 6 months apprenticing with an architectural conservation team in Osogbo before I moved to Seoul. She said it without apology, without inflation, without looking at her husband. Across the room, Tae-hwan stood very still. Seo-rin had quietly excused herself to speak with another model she recognized near the bar. She was intelligent enough to understand that whatever role she had been brought to play, the script had just been rewritten. Jaemin appeared at Tae-hwan's elbow. She's extraordinary, Jaemin said. Tae-hwan didn't respond. The chairman is treating her like a guest of honor. Nakamura hasn't spoken to anyone that long all evening. Mrs. Chun just invited her to a private luncheon in Hong Kong. Silence. And you brought a model. Tae-hwan's jaw flexed. The dragon tattoo on his neck, the powerful black and gray Korean dragon that curved from behind his left ear down toward his collarbone, seemed to shift beneath the ballroom light. That's enough, Jaemin. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, your wife is doing more for Ryu Holdings' reputation in 30 minutes than our entire PR department has done in a year. And she doesn't even know it. Tae-hwan turned to face him. His expression was controlled, but something behind his eyes, deep, private, and very close to pain, was beginning to surface. I said that's enough. Jaemin held his gaze for 3 seconds, then nodded once and stepped back. But the damage was already done. Not to Tae-hwan's reputation, to his certainty. At 9 o'clock, the formal dinner program began. Guests moved toward their assigned tables, round, 10-seat arrangements with handwritten name cards and centerpieces of white orchids. The seating chart had been meticulously organized by the chairman's staff weeks in advance. Tae-hwan's table was near the front, table 3, alongside Nakamura, a senior Korean banking executive, and several other high-profile guests. Seo-rin had been placed beside him. But when Tae-hwan reached his chair, he noticed something. The name card beside his had been changed. It no longer read Han Seo-rin. It read Naya Dapariu. He looked up. Across the room, the chairman caught his eye and offered the faintest smile. A message without words. I know who your wife is. I know what you did. And I've decided to correct it. Naya arrived at the table moments later. She saw the name card. She saw Tae-hwan. She saw the empty seat beside him. For one terrible, suspended moment, neither of them spoke. Then Naya pulled out her own chair, sat down, placed her napkin in her lap, and turned to greet Nakamura with a warm, composed smile. She didn't look at her husband. She didn't need to. He could feel the distance between them more clearly than if she had been standing on the other side of the Han River. Dinner unfolded in 3 courses. A delicate Korean-French fusion menu, designed by a Michelin-starred chef the chairman had personally recruited. Between courses, conversation flowed across the table. Business, culture, investment, philosophy. Midway through the 2nd course, a discussion arose about a problem that had been quietly plaguing the chairman's latest development project, the Jeju International Cultural Center. The project was ambitious. A $500 million complex that would blend Korean, East African, and West African architectural traditions into a living cultural exchange hub. But the design team had reached an impasse. The Korean architectural elements and the African design motifs felt disconnected. 2 international design firms had already failed to create a cohesive vision. The ministry representative mentioned this casually, almost as an aside. The integration challenge is significant, he said. We've reviewed 11 proposals. None of them capture the philosophical connection between the 2 traditions. Silence around the table. Naya set down her fork. May I offer a perspective? She said. Every head turned. The ministry representative hesitated, then gestured for her to continue. The problem isn't aesthetic, Naya said. It's structural. Korean traditional architecture, Hanok design, is built around the concept of jong. The idea that spaces should create emotional connection between people and their environment. West African compound architecture, particularly Yoruba spatial design, operates on a nearly identical principle, called J, which means communal harmony through shared space. She paused. Both traditions believe that architecture should serve relationships, not just function. But every proposal I've seen treats them as 2 separate design languages that need to be forced together. They don't. They already share a philosophical foundation. The design should begin from that shared root and grow outward, not paste African motifs onto Korean structures or vice versa. The table was silent. Nakamura set down his wine glass. That, he said, is the most precise analysis of this problem I have heard in 18 months. The ministry representative leaned forward. Could you elaborate on how that would work spatially? Naya reached for her leather notebook. She opened it to a page filled with hand-drawn sketches, small, precise architectural concepts she had been developing privately for months. She began walking the table through her vision. And for the next 12 minutes, every powerful person at that table listened to a 23-year-old Nigerian woman explain something that billion-dollar firms had failed to articulate. Taehwan watched her. He watched her hands move across the notebook. He watched the way she made eye contact with each person as she spoke. He watched the way she smiled when Nakamura asked a follow-up question. Not the nervous smile of someone seeking approval, but the warm, genuine smile of a person who loved what she did and was finally being allowed to share it. He watched the woman he had been too ashamed to bring. And something inside his chest, something armored and controlled and carefully maintained for 32 years, began to crack. By the time dessert was served, the social dynamics of the banquet had shifted irreversibly. Guests who had been competing for the chairman's attention now drifted toward Naya's orbit instead. Women complimented her dress. Executives asked for her business card. Mrs. Chun confirmed the Hong Kong luncheon invitation. Dr. Lim from Seoul National University asked whether she would consider a guest lecture on cross-cultural design. Seo Rin had been relocated to table 7. She sat among perfectly pleasant people, but the significance of the move was unmistakable. She sipped her champagne and watched Naya from across the room with an expression that was difficult to read. Not jealousy exactly, but something closer to reluctant recognition. She had been brought to be seen. Naya had arrived and been heard. The difference was devastating. Near the bar, Ryu Taesung watched everything unfold with the focused patience of a man who had been waiting for his cousin to make exactly this kind of mistake. Taesung was 40, taller than Taehwan by an inch but leaner, with sharp features and the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. He wore a navy suit and a silk tie the color of dried blood. He had spent 15 years in the shadow of his younger cousin's rise, watching Tae-hwan inherit their grandfather's organization, watching him build Ryu Holdings into an empire, watching him earn the loyalty that Tae-sung believed should have been his. He lifted his phone. He took a photograph of Naya speaking with the chairman. Then he opened a group chat with 6 senior members of the Ryu Family Council. His message was brief. The foreign wife is making moves. She's positioning herself inside the chairman's inner circle. Tae-hwan either can't control her or doesn't want to. Either way, it's a problem. He pressed send. Then he smiled and waited. The banquet program reached its centerpiece at 10:15. When Chairman Kong took the stage, the room hushed. 600 guests turned toward the podium. The chairman adjusted his microphone with the unhurried confidence of a man who had addressed audiences of this magnitude for 40 years. He spoke for several minutes about the future of Korean global investment. He discussed the Jeju International Cultural Center. He described its ambition, its challenges, its potential to redefine how Korea engaged with the African continent. Then he said something no one expected. For 6 months, my team and I have searched for the creative visionary behind the most compelling proposal this project has ever received. The work was submitted anonymously, but its brilliance could not remain hidden. Tonight, I am proud to announce that we have identified the creator of this extraordinary vision. He looked directly at table 3. Mrs. Naya Dapariu, would you please stand? The room turned. Naya's breath caught. Her fingers pressed against the edge of the table. She had not been warned. She had not been prepared. She had not been asked. But she had spent her entire life preparing for moments that arrived without warning. She stood. The champagne gown caught the light. Her ponytail fell straight against her back. Her brown eyes were steady. Ladies and gentlemen, the chairman said, this young woman, at 23 years old, has created a design and cultural framework that surpasses the work of 11 international firms. I am formally inviting her to serve as the lead creative director of the Jeju International Cultural Center. Applause erupted. Not polite, obligatory applause. Real applause. The kind that began in one corner of the room and spread until it filled every inch of the ballroom. Naya stood in the center of it. Tae-hwan sat beside her empty chair. His hands were in his lap. His fingers, loyal honor, were interlocked so tightly his knuckles had turned white. He stared at the tablecloth, because the realization that was breaking through his defenses was not something his pride could absorb gracefully. He didn't know. He didn't know about the proposal. He didn't know about the months of research. He didn't know about the late nights she spent sketching at the kitchen table while he worked in his office 2 rooms away. He didn't know about the 3 intermediary firms. He didn't know about the design council submission. He didn't know who his wife was. And right now, in front of 600 of the most powerful people in South Korea, that ignorance was the loudest sound in the room. Naya sat down after the applause faded. She thanked the chairman graciously. She accepted congratulations from the guests at her table. She still didn't look at Tae-hwan, but he felt her silence like a blade held perfectly still against his throat. At 10:45, the formal program ended, and the banquet transitioned into an open networking reception. Guests rose from their tables, champagne was refreshed, and the orchestra shifted to something softer. Tae-hwan stood. He needed to speak to her. He moved toward her. But before he could close the distance, Ryu Tae-sung appeared. Cousin. Tae-sung's voice was warm. His smile was precise. Quite a night. Not now. The family council is already talking. Your wife just became the most discussed person in this room. That's either a tremendous opportunity or a significant liability. I said not now. I'm trying to help you, Tae-hwan. The elders are concerned. An outsider gaining this level of visibility inside the chairman's circle, it raises questions about where your loyalties are being directed. Tae-hwan stopped walking. He turned slowly. His charcoal gray eyes locked onto Tae-sung with the flat, measured intensity that had earned him the name Black Viper. She is my wife, Tae-hwan said. She is not an outsider. 6 hours ago you brought a model instead of her. That tells the family everything they need to know about what you really think. The words landed like ice water, because they were true. and Tae-hwan couldn't argue with them. Tae-sung smiled. "Just something to think about," he said, and he walked away. Tae-hwan stood alone in the crowd. Around him, the banquet continued. Glasses clinking, laughter rising, conversations threading through the golden light. But he heard none of it. He looked across the room. Naya was speaking with Dr. Lim and a young Korean architect who was asking her about sustainable material sourcing. She was smiling. She was gesturing with her hands the way she always did when she was passionate about something. She was radiant, and she had done all of it without him. That was the part that hurt most. Not that she had succeeded. That she had succeeded despite him. At 11:20, Naya excused herself from a conversation and walked toward the balcony that overlooked the hotel gardens. The night air was cool. Late spring in Seoul, the kind of evening that smelled like rain and cherry blossoms. She stood at the railing. Her hands trembled. She had held herself together for 3 hours. She had smiled, spoken, impressed, connected, accepted an opportunity that could change her entire career. But now, alone on the balcony, the weight of what had happened settled onto her shoulders like a physical thing. He had replaced her. He had looked at everything she was, her intelligence, her creativity, her love, her loyalty, and decided it wasn't enough. She pressed her palms against the cold stone railing and breathed. Behind her, the balcony door opened. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She knew his footsteps the way she knew her own heartbeat. "Naya." His voice was quiet, not commanding, not cold, just quiet. The voice of a man who had finally run out of ways to avoid the truth. She didn't respond. He stepped closer, 3 feet behind her. "I need to explain." "No," she said. Her voice was calm, steady, absolutely devastating in its composure. "You don't get to explain. Not tonight." "Naya, please." She turned. Her brown eyes met his gray ones. And for the first time in their marriage, Tae-hwan saw something in his wife's expression that terrified him more than any rival, any threat, any weapon ever held against him. He saw clarity. The absolute, unshakable clarity of a woman who finally understood exactly where she stood. "I wore this dress for you," she said. "I learned your language for you. I moved to your city for you. I rearranged my entire life, my career, my family, my identity, to fit inside your world. And tonight, when you had the chance to show that world who I am," her voice didn't break. "You chose someone else." Tae-hwan's lips parted. No words came. "The chairman knew my work," she said. "Nakamura respected my ideas. Mrs. Chun invited me to Hong Kong. Dr. Lim asked me to lecture at Seoul National. 600 strangers saw my value in one evening." She paused. "Why couldn't you?" He had no answer. Because the truth, the real, unvarnished, humiliating truth, was that he had never bothered to look. He had been so consumed with protecting his image that he had never once looked at the woman standing next to him and asked the simplest question. "Who are you?" Naya turned back to the railing. "Go back to your banquet, Tae-hwan," she said quietly. "Go back to your model. Go back to whatever version of your life makes you comfortable." She stared at the garden below. "I'll find my own way home." Tae-hwan stood on that balcony. The sounds of the banquet drifted through the glass doors behind him. Music, laughter, the clink of crystal. His wife stood 3 feet away. It might as well have been an ocean. And for the first time in his adult life, the most feared man in Seoul had absolutely no idea how to close the distance. The penthouse was dark when Tae-hwan returned at midnight. He stood in the entryway for a long time without removing his shoes, which was unlike him. A man whose discipline extended even to the smallest domestic rituals. His jacket was unbuttoned. His tie hung loose. The mechanical watch on his wrist ticked quietly in the silence. He already knew she wasn't in their bedroom. He found her in the guest room at the end of the hall. The door was closed but not locked. A thin blade of warm light glowed beneath it. He raised his hand to knock, then stopped. His knuckles, loyal honor, hovered an inch from the wood. He lowered his hand. He walked back to the master bedroom alone. He sat on the edge of the bed. He removed his cufflinks and set them on the nightstand, one at a time, with the precision of a man performing a ritual that had lost its meaning. He looked at the empty space beside him, the dip in the mattress where she usually slept, the faint scent of shea butter still clinging to her pillow. 18 months ago, she had slept beside him every night. She would press her back against his chest and pull his arm across her waist, and he would lie still in the dark feeling something he didn't have a word for, something warm and ordinary and terrifying in its gentleness. He hadn't told her about the proposal. She hadn't told him either. They had been living in the same apartment, sleeping in the same bed, eating at the same table, and somehow managed to become strangers. That was his fault. He knew it now. He had known it on the balcony. He had probably known it for months. But knowing something and accepting it were separated by a distance his pride was only now learning how to cross. He didn't sleep. Naya didn't sleep either. She lay in the guest room bed, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling. The champagne gown pooled around her like cooling metal. Her ponytail spread across the white pillow. Her shoes were still on, nude heels, one strap already unbuckled. She replayed the evening in her mind. The chairman's handshake, the applause, Mrs. Chen's invitation, Dr. Lim's admiration, the notebook sketches that had made Nakamura, the man who was famously unimpressed by everything, lean forward in his chair. She had done something remarkable tonight, and the person who should have been proudest of her had been the one who tried hardest to ensure she wasn't there. Her phone buzzed. A message from Mama Iridi. I know you're still awake. I know because I am still awake. Tell me what happened. Naya typed back. I went. The chairman knows my work. He offered me the lead on the Jeju project. The reply came in 4 seconds. Naya. I am screaming. Your uncle just woke up. He thinks there is a fire. Tell me everything. Despite everything, Naya smiled. It was a small smile. Fragile, bittersweet. But it was real. She typed, I'll call you tomorrow. I love you, Auntie. I love you more. And Naya, whatever he says tomorrow morning. Remember that the woman in that ballroom tonight didn't need his permission to shine. Naya set the phone on her chest. She closed her eyes. She still didn't sleep. Morning arrived gray and quiet. Seoul's spring rain had begun sometime around 4 a.m., and the windows of the penthouse were streaked with water that caught the pale light and scattered it across the walls in restless patterns. Naya was in the kitchen by 7. She had changed out of the gown into soft cream-colored lounge pants and an oversized ivory cashmere sweater. Her ponytail was gathered in a loose low bun. No makeup, no jewelry except the thin gold chain she never removed. She made coffee, Korean instant for the speed, Nigerian style with a heavy pour of condensed milk for the comfort. She sat at the marble island and held the mug with both hands, letting the warmth seep through her fingers. Taehwan appeared at 7:15. He was dressed already. Black trousers, white shirt, no tie, top 2 buttons open. The sleeve tattoos on his forearms were visible beneath rolled cuffs. Dark ink against warm golden skin. He looked like a man who had slept 0 hours and was pretending he had slept 8. He stopped at the edge of the kitchen. Can I sit? He asked. The fact that he asked, in his own kitchen, in his own penthouse, told Naya everything she needed to know about where they stood. It's your home, she said. It's our home. Is it? He pulled out the stool across from her and sat. The marble island stretched between them like a negotiation table. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Taehwan said, I'm not going to make excuses. Naya looked at him. I brought Seorin because I was afraid, he said. I was afraid that the people in that room would look at you and see something that didn't fit. I was afraid they would judge me, judge us, and decide that I wasn't someone they could take seriously. He paused. And I was wrong. Naya's expression didn't soften. Wrong about what? She said. All of it. Be specific. The request cut through his chest like a scalpel. She wasn't going to let him generalize. She wasn't going to accept a broad, comfortable apology that allowed him to avoid the precise shape of what he'd done. He exhaled. I was wrong to think you wouldn't belong in that room. I was wrong to believe that your background made you less than anyone there. I was wrong to replace you with someone who looked the part because I was too afraid to let you be yourself. And I was... His voice caught. He stopped, regathered. I was wrong to never ask about your work, about the proposal, about any of it. He looked at his hands on the marble. You were building something extraordinary, Naya, and I was so focused on my own world that I didn't even notice yours. Silence. The rain continued against the windows. Naya took a slow sip of coffee, set the mug down. Do you know what the hardest part was? She said. He waited. It wasn't the photograph. It wasn't seeing you walk in with her. It wasn't even realizing you'd lied about sending a car. She looked at him directly. The hardest part was realizing that you've never once asked me what I do during the day. The sentence landed like a stone dropping into still water. In 18 months of marriage, she continued, you have never asked me about a single project. You've never looked at my sketches. You've never asked why I stay up late at the kitchen table. You assumed I was doing something small, something unimportant, because that's what you decided about me before you ever bothered to find out. Taehwan's hands were completely still on the marble. That's not love, Taehwan, she said. That's ownership with a wedding ring. He flinched. Not visibly, he was too controlled for that. But she saw it. The micro-movement behind his eyes. The tightening of the tendons in his forearms beneath the dark ink. I know, he said. Knowing isn't enough. Then tell me what is. She studied him for a long time. The man she had married in her aunt's compound in Lagos, surrounded by music and family and the smell of suya smoke. The man who had taken her hand during the vows and looked at her as though she were the only real thing in the world. The man who had somehow become a stranger sitting across a marble island in a penthouse that felt like a luxury prison. Time, she said, and change that I can see. She stood, took her coffee, and walked to the living room. Taehwan remained at the island. He stared at the spot where her mug had been. A wet ring on the marble, already drying, already disappearing. Over the next 3 days, the aftermath of the banquet unfolded in ways that Taehwan could not control. And that was, for a man whose entire life was built on control, an unfamiliar kind of agony. The Korean business press picked up the story. Not the story of the model, Seo Rin's presence had been almost entirely overshadowed, but the story of the unknown Nigerian creative director who had been personally recognized by Chairman Kong at the most exclusive event of the year. Articles appeared in digital business magazines. Naya's name was mentioned alongside the Jeju project. Her small creative consultancy in Mapogu, which she had been running with 2 part-time employees and a shared printer, received 14 new client inquiries in 72 hours. The Seoul Design Council released a statement confirming that the anonymous proposal had been submitted through proper channels and praising its innovation. Dr. Lim from Seoul National University formally extended a guest lecture invitation. Mrs. Chen's assistant called to confirm the Hong Kong luncheon. And inside the Ryu family, the response was considerably less warm. Taesung moved quickly. He convened an informal meeting of the family council, the 6 senior Ryu family members who served as the organization's traditional governance body. They met in a private room at a restaurant in Cheongdam-dong, the kind of place that didn't appear on any map and required a phone call 2 weeks in advance. Taesung presented the situation with surgical precision. The chairman's attention has shifted, he said. Taehwan's wife is now positioned inside the most important business relationship this family has ever cultivated. If she gains influence over the chairman's decisions, or worse, if she begins operating independently of Ryu interests, our position is compromised. Elder Ryu Myung-hee, 74, the family's most senior matriarch, listened without expression. What are you suggesting? She asked. I'm suggesting that Taehwan's inability to manage his household is becoming a liability. The organization needs stability. It needs certainty. And right now, his marriage is producing neither. The room was silent. You want his seat, said another elder, Ryu Dongchul, 68, a former military officer who had transitioned into the family's logistics operations. Taesung smiled. I want what's best for the family. Those aren't always the same thing. They are tonight. The meeting ended without a resolution, but the seed had been planted. And Taesung knew that seeds, properly tended, always grew. Taehwan learned about the meeting within hours. Jaemin had sources inside every branch of the family. It was why Taehwan had trusted him for 14 years. Taesung is making his play, Jaemin said. They stood in Taehwan's office at Ryu Holdings, the city glittering below them like a circuit board. He's using the banquet to frame Naya as a threat to family stability. She's not a threat. I know that. You know that. But the elders only know what Taesung tells them. And right now, he's telling them that your wife is an outsider who's gaining too much visibility too fast. Taehwan's fist tightened against the window frame. I'll handle Taesung. How? The way I handle everything. Jaemin shook his head. That's exactly what he wants. He wants you to overreact. He wants you to make a public move against a family council member so he can paint you as unstable. This isn't a business rival, Taehwan. This is your family. You can't burn it down without burning yourself. Taehwan stared at the city. He thought about Naya's words on the balcony. Why couldn't you? And in the kitchen. That's not love. That's ownership with a wedding ring. He turned from the window. I need to talk to her. About Taesung? About everything. He found Naya at her co-working space in Mapogu. It was a modest place. Open floor plan, shared desks, a wall covered in pinned fabric swatches and mood boards. She was standing at a large table reviewing material samples with one of her employees, a young Korean woman named Yuna who was equal parts terrified and inspired by her boss. Taehwan appeared in the doorway. Every person in the co-working space looked up. A 6'3" Korean man in a black overcoat with visible tattoo ink climbing his neck was not a typical visitor to a Mapogu design studio. Yuna's eyes went wide. Naya looked up. Her expression remained neutral. Can we talk? He said. She considered this for a moment that lasted longer than he was comfortable with. Yuna, take a break, she said. Yuna practically teleported out of the room. The studio emptied. Naya crossed her arms and leaned against the work table. You've never been here before, she said. I know. I've worked out of this space for 11 months. I know. You drove past the street every day on your way to your office. For 11 months. Each sentence was a quiet indictment. She wasn't raising her voice. She wasn't crying. She was simply laying facts on the table the way she laid fabric swatches. Neatly, precisely, allowing the pattern to speak for itself. Naya, he said. Taesung is moving against us. She tilted her head slightly. Against you, she corrected. He's moving against you. I don't have a seat at the Ryu family table, remember? You made sure of that. That's what I came to talk about. I'm listening, he told her. About the family council meeting. About Taesung's positioning. About the narrative being constructed, that she was a foreign infiltrator gaining unauthorized influence. Naya listened without interruption. When he finished, she was quiet for several seconds. Then she said something that changed the trajectory of everything. I don't need you to destroy everyone who dislikes me. I need you to trust me. He blinked. Taesung's problem isn't with me, she continued. It's with you. He wants your position. I'm just the angle he's using. If you react with force, you validate his narrative. If you react with control and intimidation, you prove to the elders that you're the unstable leader he claims you are. She unfolded her arms. But if you trust me, if you let me handle the parts of this that are about me, and you handle the parts that are about your family with wisdom instead of anger, he has nothing. Taehwan stared at her. This was the woman he had been ashamed to bring to a banquet. This woman who was standing in a shared co-working space in Mapogu, wearing a soft sage-green blouse and cream trousers, with fabric swatches pinned behind her and a half-finished mood board on the table, had just articulated a strategic response to a family power play more clearly than his entire advisory team. You're right, he said. 2 words. But the way he said them, quietly, without qualification, without adding a caveat, made Naya look at him differently for the first time since the banquet. Not with forgiveness. Not yet. But with something that resembled the beginning of willingness. Then act like it, she said. Naya handled Taesung's narrative the way she handled every design problem, by making the work undeniable. Over the next 2 weeks, she threw herself into the Jeju project. She met with the chairman's development team 3 times. She presented a revised conceptual framework that integrated traditional Korean courtyard principles with Yoruba compound spatial logic, both traditions centered on communal gathering spaces that radiated outward from a shared center. The framework was elegant, culturally literate, and structurally innovative. The chairman's team approved it unanimously. She also accepted Dr. Lim's lecture invitation at Seoul National University. The lecture, titled Shared Roots, Finding Connection Between Korean and West African Architectural Philosophies, drew an audience of 300 students and faculty. She delivered it in Korean, with only occasional English when technical terminology required precision. She wore a beautiful dusty rose tailored dress with a structured waist. Her ponytail was sleek and polished. Small gold earrings. No other jewelry. She spoke for 55 minutes without notes. When she finished, the audience stood. 3 days later, a clip from the lecture went viral on Korean social media. The hashtag that accompanied it translated roughly to #WhoIsNayadapa. The answer spread across Seoul like light, finding every corner of a dark room. Taehwan watched all of this from a careful distance. He wanted to help. He wanted to call the chairman and advocate for her. He wanted to use his connections to accelerate her visibility. He wanted to protect her, promote her, ensure her success. But he remembered what she said. "I need you to trust me." So instead, he did something far more difficult than any business negotiation or underworld confrontation he had ever faced. He stepped back. He let her work. He started paying attention. He read the articles about her. He watched the university lecture clip 3 times. He visited her co-working space, not to discuss Taesung or strategy, but to sit quietly at a spare desk and watch her work with Yuna on material sourcing for the Jeju project. He asked questions. Not executive questions designed to assess or evaluate, genuine questions. Curious questions. Why this fabric? How do you choose the color palettes? What does this symbol mean in Yoruba design? Each question was a small admission. I should have asked this a long time ago. Naya answered each one. Not warmly, not yet. But she answered. And each answer opened a door that his pride had kept locked for 18 months. 3 weeks after the banquet, Taehwan requested a meeting with Elder Ryu Myung-hee. They met at her estate in Bukshin, a traditional hanok surrounded by cherry trees. She served him tea personally, a gesture that carried enormous weight in their family hierarchy. "Grandmother," he said. He hadn't called her that since he was a teenager. Her expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Taesung has presented his concerns," she said. "I know. He believes your wife is a liability. He's wrong. Prove it." Taehwan set down his tea. She is the lead creative director of the chairman's most important international project. She has been invited to lecture at Seoul National University. She has received formal invitations from the Chen family in Hong Kong and the Nakamura Group in Tokyo. She accomplished all of this without my name, without my connections, and without my help. He paused. "The liability in this family is not my wife. It's my cousin's ambition." Myung-hee studied him for a long time. Her dark eyes, the same charcoal gray that ran through the Ryu bloodline, held the accumulated wisdom of 7 decades. "And the model?" she asked. The question was quiet, but it carried everything. "A mistake," Taehwan said. "My mistake. I was ashamed of my wife, and I shouldn't have been. I chose appearance over substance, and it nearly cost me everything that matters. Nearly. I'm still trying to fix it. Can you?" He didn't answer immediately. "I don't know," he said finally. "But I know I have to try." Myung-hee lifted her tea. "Then try," she said. "And Taehwan, the next time you consider hiding the woman you married, remember that this family's power was built by a woman your grandfather was also once ashamed of. She was a fisherman's daughter from Busan. She built half of what you inherited." She sipped her tea. "We have never been as elegant as we pretend to be." Taehwan left the estate with something he hadn't carried in weeks. Not confidence, direction. He confronted Taesung the following day. Not with threats. Not with violence. Not with the cold fury the Black Viper was known for. He confronted him with truth. They met in the private office at Ryu Holdings. Taesung arrived expecting a power play. Instead, Taehwan sat behind his desk and placed a folder in front of his cousin. Open it, Taehwan said. Taesung opened it. Inside were financial records, detailed, meticulously compiled, showing 3 shell companies Taesung had been operating outside the family's oversight. Companies that had been siphoning logistics revenue from Ryu operations for nearly 4 years. You've been stealing from the family, Taehwan said. Not a lot, just enough to be invisible. But you got comfortable. And comfortable people get careless. Taesung's face went blank. The elders will receive this information tomorrow morning, Taehwan continued, along with my recommendation that you be removed from the family council and reassigned to our Busan port operations. Permanently. You can't. I already have. Taehwan leaned forward. You tried to use my wife to destabilize my position. You tried to turn my family against me by calling her an outsider. But the only person who's been operating outside this family's interests is you. Taesung stood. His hands were trembling. Not with fear, but with the specific rage of a man who had just realized that the trap he'd been building for someone else had been built around him instead. This isn't over, Taesung said. Yes, Taehwan said quietly. It is. Taesung left. He was reassigned to Busan within the week. The family council reviewed the financial evidence. Elder Myung-hee personally signed the transfer order. The threat dissolved. But the harder work, the work that couldn't be resolved with folders and financial records, was still waiting. 2 days after Taesung's removal, Naya received a call from Han Seo-rin. She almost didn't answer. The model's name on her screen provoked a complex emotional response. Not anger, exactly, but a sharp awareness of what that name represented. She answered anyway. Mrs. Ryu, Seo-rin said. Her voice was measured, professional, carefully neutral. I'd like to meet, if you're willing. They met at a quiet cafe in Samcheongdong, the kind of place with white walls, natural wood, and single-origin coffee that cost more than a meal. Seo-rin arrived first. She wore a simple black dress. No dramatic styling. No magazine cover presentation. She looked, Naya thought, like a person rather than an image. Thank you for coming, Seo-rin said. Naya sat across from her. Why did you want to meet? Seo-rin wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. I want you to know that I didn't know he was married. The words sat between them. He introduced himself through my agency, Seo-rin continued. He said he needed a companion for a high-profile corporate event. It's not unusual in my industry. Companies hire models for public appearances regularly. I assumed he was single. She paused. I found out the truth at the banquet, when your husband's associate said who you were. She looked at Naya directly. I want you to know that if I had known, I would not have agreed. Naya studied her, searched for deception, found none. I appreciate you telling me, Naya said. You were extraordinary that night, Seo-rin said. The way you handled yourself, the way the chairman responded to you, it was the most genuine thing I've seen at one of those events in years. She gave a small, wry smile. I've been attending banquets like that since I was 22. No one has ever walked toward me the way Chairman Kong walked toward you. Naya felt something shift in her chest. Not friendship, not yet. But the recognition that this woman had also been used as a prop in someone else's performance. He used both of us, Naya said. Seo-rin nodded slowly. He did. They finished their coffee. They exchanged numbers. They did not become instant friends. Life wasn't that simple. But something honest had passed between them, and honesty, Naya had learned, was the rarest luxury of all. 5 weeks after the banquet, the chairman's office announced the formal appointment of Naya Dapariu as lead creative director of the Jeju International Cultural Center. The press release included a photograph of her standing on the Jeju site with the architectural team, wearing a butter-yellow structured blazer over a white top, her ponytail catching the coastal wind, her expression focused and calm. The announcement was covered by 3 major Korean business publications and picked up internationally. Mama Iridi called 17 times in one day. Naya, your uncle has told every person in this market. The yam seller knows. The woman who fixes shoes knows. The pastor knows. Everyone knows. Naya laughed. A real, full laugh that she hadn't produced in weeks. Tell uncle I said thank you. Tell him yourself. He is standing right here holding a megaphone he bought from I don't know where. Auntie, I love you. I love you more. And Naya. Yes. I am proud of you. Your mother would be proud of you. Every woman in this family is proud of you. You walked into that room with nothing but yourself, and you walked out with everything. Naya's eyes glistened. Not everything, Auntie. A pause. He is trying? He is trying. Then let him try. But do not forget, forgiveness is a gift, not an obligation. He must earn it, and you must never apologize for requiring that. Yes, Ma. On a Tuesday evening in late June, Taehwan came home and found Naya at the kitchen table. Her sketches were spread across the surface, detailed drawings of the Jeju Project's central courtyard, with annotations in both English and Korean. She was wearing a soft mocha-colored sweater and cream pants. Her ponytail was loose. Her reading glasses, simple, round, wire-framed, sat on her nose. She looked up. He was carrying a bag. What's that? She asked. He set it on the table. Inside was a book, a large, expensive volume on Yoruba architectural history, published by a university press in Ibadan. The bookstore in Gwangwaman didn't have it, he said. I ordered it from Nigeria. It took 3 weeks. She stared at the book. I've been reading about Jay, he said. The communal harmony concept you mentioned at the banquet. I wanted to understand it better. She pulled the book from the bag, ran her fingers over the cover. You didn't have to do this, she said. I know. He sat across from her. But I wanted to. She opened the book. Inside the front cover, he had written something in his careful, angular handwriting. To the woman who was building a world I was too blind to see. I'm sorry. And I'm learning. Naya read it twice. She didn't cry, but her eyes held a brightness that was almost more devastating. This is a start, she said. I know. It's only a start. I know that too. She closed the book, looked at him across the table, across the sketches and annotations and fabric swatches that represented a life she had built entirely on her own terms. Sit down, she said. I'll show you what I'm working on. He sat, and for the first time in their marriage, he listened. Not because he had to, because he finally wanted to. The weeks that followed were not a fairy tale. Naya did not wake up one morning and decide that the pain had evaporated. Trust, she understood, was not a switch, it was a garden. It required daily tending, could not be rushed. But she watched him. She watched him show up at her co-working space without being asked, carrying lunch from the Korean-Nigerian fusion restaurant in Itaewon that she loved. She watched him sit in the back of the room during her second guest lecture at Seoul National University, listening to every word. She watched him ask Yuna about the Jeju project timeline, genuinely, respectfully, as though Yuna's opinion mattered. She watched him attend a Ryu family gathering and introduce her to every elder personally. This is my wife, Naya, he said. Not quickly, not as an afterthought, with intention. She watched him meet Chairman Kong at a follow-up dinner and, when the chairman praised Naya's work, respond with 6 words that made her chest ache. She's the most talented person I know. He said it without performance, without agenda. He said it like a man stating a fact he had only recently learned but would never forget. And slowly, carefully, cautiously, with the patience of a woman who understood that real repair took longer than real damage, Naya began to let him back in. Not all at once, but enough. Enough to return to the master bedroom. Enough to share coffee at the kitchen island in the mornings. Enough to let him sit beside her while she sketched. Enough to place her hand on his forearm. Over the dark ink, over the Korean tiger and the temple architecture and the flowing storm clouds, and feel the warmth underneath. Enough to begin believing that the man she married might finally be becoming the man she needed. 3 months after the banquet, the Seoul International Business Forum held its annual autumn gala. It was the second most important social event on Korea's corporate calendar, smaller than the chairman's banquet but equally prestigious. Attendance was by invitation only. The guest list included CEOs, diplomats, cultural leaders, and a carefully curated selection of international partners. Naya received her own invitation, not as Taehwan's wife, as the lead creative director of the Jeju International Cultural Center. The invitation bore her name alone. On the evening of the gala, she stood in the penthouse bedroom in front of the mirror. She wore an ivory gown, floor-length, elegantly structured, with a subtle draping across one shoulder that referenced both Korean hanbok geometry and Yoruba wrapper styling. She had designed it herself. The fabric was Korean silk sourced from a traditional weaver in Jeonju, dyed to match the exact warm ivory of her grandmother's wedding cloth, which Mama Iridi had sent from Lagos in a carefully wrapped parcel. Her ponytail was sleek and luminous, falling straight down her back. Soft baby hairs framed her forehead. Small gold drop earrings, a thin gold bracelet, natural makeup that accentuated her cheekbones and the warmth of her deep brown skin. She looked at herself. She didn't look like she was trying to prove anything. She looked like a woman who had finally stopped asking for permission to be seen. Taehwan appeared behind her in the mirror. Black suit, clean lines, slicked back hair, the dragon on his neck just visible above his collar. He looked at her reflection. "You're beautiful," he said. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't a peace offering. It was the honest observation of a man who had spent 3 months learning how to see. "Thank you," she said. "Are you ready?" She turned from the mirror. "Are you?" He understood what she was asking. Not whether he was physically ready to attend an event. Whether he was ready to walk into a room full of the most powerful people in Korea with his Nigerian wife on his arm. Visibly, proudly, without hesitation. "Yes," he said, and he meant it. They arrived together. The gala entrance was lined with photographers and press. Cameras flashed the moment the car door opened. Taehwan stepped out first, then turned and offered his hand. Naya took it. They walked the entrance together, side by side, his hand resting on the small of her back. Not possessive, not controlling. Present. Inside, the room responded immediately. Heads turned. Conversations shifted. People recognized Naya from the press coverage, from the university lecture, from the chairman's announcement. A prominent Korean journalist approached within the first 5 minutes. "Mr. Ryu, could you introduce your companion this evening?" Taehwan looked at the journalist. Then he looked at Naya, and he smiled. A real smile, rare and unhurried. The kind that transformed his entire face from something intimidating into something almost gentle. "She's my wife," he said. "And she's the woman I'm most proud of." Naya heard the words. She felt them land in the space behind her sternum where she had been carrying the weight of his shame for 18 months. And for the first time since the night of the chairman's banquet, she felt that weight truly begin to lift. The gala unfolded beautifully. They moved through the room together, not as a performance of unity, but as two people who were genuinely learning how to be partners. Taehwan introduced her to colleagues. Naya introduced him to creative professionals she had met through the Jeju project. They stood beside each other during the keynote address. When a senior executive asked about the cultural center's progress, Taehwan deferred to Naya without hesitation. "She's the expert," he said simply. "I'm just learning." After the keynote, they found themselves on another balcony. Different hotel, same city, same spring turning to summer air, same two people. But different. Everything was different. Naya stood at the railing. The Han River glittered below, reflecting the city lights in long, wavering ribbons. Taehwan stood beside her. "I spent years trying to make you fit into my world," he said quietly. "I was too blind to realize you were building a world of your own." She looked at him. "I'm not going to tell you it's okay," she said, "because it wasn't. I know. But I'm going to tell you something else." She turned fully toward him. Her brown eyes held his gray ones with a steadiness that had nothing to do with confrontation and everything to do with clarity. I married you because I saw someone behind the reputation, behind the family name, behind the suits and the meetings and the control. I saw someone who was afraid of being ordinary, and I loved that person." She paused. "I still do, but I need that person to love me back. Not the version of me that fits your image, but the actual me. The one who stays up late sketching. The one who puts condensed milk in her coffee. The one who calls her aunt in Lagos 3 times a week. The one who designed a gown from her grandmother's wedding cloth." She touched the ivory fabric at her shoulder. "This me." Taehwan looked at her for a long time. Then he reached out and took her hand. Not dramatically, not desperately, gently. "The way you hold something you've finally learned is more valuable than anything you could ever buy." "This you," he said. She didn't pull away. The city hummed below them. The river carried the light. And 2 people who had been standing 3 feet apart for 18 months finally, carefully, began to close the distance. They wouldn't get everything right. They both knew that. There would be difficult conversations and quiet arguments and moments when old patterns tried to reassert themselves. But on that balcony, with the autumn air cooling between them and the sound of the gala drifting through the glass doors, something essential had shifted. He had stopped being ashamed. She had stopped being invisible. And together, they were learning that the strongest marriages weren't the ones that never broke. They were the ones where both people chose every day, in front of the world and behind closed doors, to rebuild. Naya leaned her head against his shoulder. He pressed his lips to her hair. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The silence between them, for the first time in a very long time, was not distance. It was peace.